Okay. So we go. So we finish Nedarim, and tomorrow we start the new Masechta Nazir. So tonight I wanted to do a little bit of both. We'll start with a couple of points from the end of Maseches Nedarim, and then we'll give a little introduction to Nazir. So the very last Mishnah of the Masechta is on Daf Tzadi Amud Beis, 90b. The Mishnah in the middle of the page discusses a particular case of three circumstances where the woman has a claim against her husband and she wants out of the marriage. Now, the reason why we're talking about this is because for the last week or so, we've been discussing about various Nedarim that the husband is allowed to annul, which are private issues between them, what we call beino lebeina. So the Mishnah says, and on a related topic, sometimes a woman could actually get out of the marriage if she has a claim, okay, if she has a claim on her husband. So what are some of those examples? The Mishnah on 90b, right in the middle, says, "Barishona hayu omrim shalosh nashim yotzos v'notlos ksuva." There's three types of situations that a woman can leave the marriage with a ksuva. Now, to leave the marriage without a ksuva is very easy. Right? The husband would want nothing more than to have the wife leave and not have to be responsible for anything. But it's a big chiddush to say that a woman is actually allowed to leave, okay, forcing her husband to divorce her, and she collects her ksuba. That was actually enacted at some point, okay? So let's discuss those three circumstances. The first is ha'omeres tamea ani lach. One type of situation, if she says, you know, never believe what happened while you were away last week. I was basically raped by a person. Okay, so now I can no longer go back to you. And the Gemara, we're not going to see the Gemara inside, but the Gemara qualifies this as a case of a Kohen, of an Ashes Kohen. We know that when it comes to an Ashes Kohen, they're stricter in the rules as opposed to a Yisrael. And if a woman is raped who is married to a Yisrael, is allowed to come back because, after all, ones Rachmana Patre, it wasn't her fault. So therefore, she could resume getting married. Unfortunately, when it comes to a Kohen, if she's married to a Kohen, she cannot go back. So if she claims that she in fact was raped, she is allowed to leave the marriage and she gets her ksuva. Okay, that's what we say initially. Or if she says Shemayin beini u'beinecha, she says a euphemistic saying that heaven is between me and you. There's miles and miles of separation between me and you. And the way Rashi and the Ran and the Rishonim basically say that she's saying in a nice way, hey, this guy can't produce with me. He has sexual dysfunction, whatever it is. I can't get pregnant from him. She lists a whole laundry list of things that her doctor told her is wrong with him. And she says, what's the purpose of getting married? I'm out of here. So that's the second case. The third case is she says, Netula ani mina Yehudim. We had this already a few times ago. Basically said that I don't want to have any hana from Jews anymore, and you're being one of them. So she says, I'm out of this. This is not for me. So she basically makes a neder hana against every Jew under the sun. So we let her leave. She gets her ksuva and sayonara. The Mishnah goes on to say, and this is what is important for at least today's piece, Mishnah goes on to say, you know what? After the Chachamim saw this, Chazru lomar shelo tia isha nosenes eineha bachur mekalkelas al bahal. The Mishnah said, well, after review, as they say in football, they said, you know what? This sounds like a really good way for a woman to get out of a lousy marriage. We know that, unfortunately, the man is favored when it comes to, when it comes to divorce, because he, according to the Torah rule, can divorce his wife even if she doesn't want to. Of course, we don't do that. Rabbeinu Gershon changed all that. But because the man is usually favored, here, it sounds like the pendulum swung the other way, that she is believed to say certain things and she's out of the marriage. But the Chachamim said, well, that's not fair either, because if she's in this marriage that she doesn't want, all she has to do is make up a story and say, I was raped yesterday, or you have medical problems with you. And of course, back then, it wasn't like today where you just, examine a person in 5 minutes. So obviously she has an out, right? So the Chachamim got wind of this and said, that's no good either, right? So what does the Mishnah conclude? Mishnah concludes, I'll just paraphrase it, that if she in fact has this claim of I was raped, let's say, then bring proof, right? Like they do today. You have a problem, you have a claim, you bring proof. If you're right, then God bless you. You're entitled to leave the marriage. If you can't prove it, then you can't prove it. Because if we just allow all women to carte blanche, get up and say, hey, you can't perform, you have a problem, or I got a problem because someone seduced me, someone raped me, then, then women will just start leaving. So you have to have some kind of balance. So I want to skip to the end of the Gemara, because I've always said that as far as endings of Gemara, there are two Gemaras in particular that have always had very, very riveting endings. One of them is the end of Makos. If you're not familiar with the end of Makos, it's the famous story of Rabbi Yehuda on Harabayas, where he sees the fox come out of the destruction. It was right after the Churban, and everybody's crying because they see, right? Oh, oy vey, what we had once, oy mehayalanu, right? And Rabbi Akiva's laughing, and they say, why are you laughing, or why are you crying? Whatever, that whole discussion, not for now. And that's like the very end. I think it's Daf Chaf Daled in Maseches Makos, all the way at the end, the last line, which ends off by saying Akiva nechamtanu. And this is one of those other Gemaras that is not very well known, but to me it was just fascinating Gemara, because there's a lot of psychological insight into this husband and wife feud. And I just want to go over the last couple of stories. If you look, we are on Daf Tzadi Aleph 91a, 3 lines from the bottom by the 2 dots. Okay, so let's pick up from there. Okay, we are, like I said, Tzadi Aleph, Amud Aleph on the bottom. We're going to start with a couple of stories. Again, these stories are related to the Mishnah as to when we believe this woman, do we believe this woman, and does she have anything up her sleeve? Okay, that's going to be the common denominator of these stories. So the Gemara says, Hahi Itza, there was a woman, a wife, the Kol Yoma de Tashmish, a certain woman that every day when she had tashmish with her husband, when they had relations, mikadma mashia yadela gavra, right? Every day she would rise, right? The next morning she'd get up early and she would wash her husband's hands. That's what her minhag was, okay? Fine. Yom echad asile maya lemishashe. So one morning, right, she bought him water to wash his hands. Okay, so Amar Allah, so he said, honey, hada milsalo habas haidna. Why are you bringing me water? Last night I went to bed early. Nothing went on between us. Okay, so he's like, uh-oh, why is she bringing me water if nothing went on between us? So Amrullah, she said, something did go on. The problem is, I don't know if it was with you or not. She said, Im Kain, Chad min anachrim haluye. She said, one of those Avon, I don't know. I know the Avon lady. Is there like an Avon male, Avon guy? I don't know, whatever it is. Some of the people who would bring over perfume, who are the Nachrim, the non-Jews, were there. They were here, and it's possible that it was one of them. I thought it was you, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know who I slept with last night. If it wasn't you, as you're saying that you went to bed early, you had a headache, perhaps it was one of them. And she's thinking to herself, yeah, if you buy my story and I'm raped, according to the Mishnah, I could get out of this marriage. So we think that this was her get out of jail free card that she wanted to use, right? She wanted to outsmart the husband. So the question is, do we buy her story, right? Is she telling the truth, or does she have one big ulterior motive to lie, i.e. to get out of this marriage? So Rav Nachman said, Eineha nasna ba'acher, v'leis bei mishasha b'mile. No, we don't believe her. Nothing went on. She possibly has her eyes on someone else and needs to get out of this marriage. Now, for a woman to get out of a marriage is very difficult. The man has to agree. But if he doesn't want to agree, then she's stuck. But if you remember from our Mishnah said that she in fact does have an out. Her out is, hey, I slept with someone and I'm admitting it to you, whether it was rape, whether it was done. Now, she can't say I did it willingly. She says, I must have not known. And that's part of her whole story, because she blamed, or she, at least in the beginning, said, it's actually you, my husband. But if it wasn't you, then it was someone else that I'm not aware of. So therefore, if she's not aware of it, may not be her fault. And if it may not be her fault, then she qualifies as one of those three circumstances in the Mishnah that she could get out of the marriage. Rav Nachman said, no way, Jose, we don't buy her story. She rather has her eyes for another man, and therefore she lacks credibility. She's unreliable, and what's the result? She goes back to her husband. Okay, failure. That's story number one. And that kind of, like I said, that's in support of the Mishnah of something happens, you got to prove it, right? There's no proof over here. You just can't say something and we assume that you're telling the truth. Story number two, Hayitza, a similar story. Hayitza, there was a certain married woman, okay? She wasn't too happy with her husband. Okay, Amar La, he said to her, Ha'idna Maishna, I know you don't really like me, but today you're super upset. What did I do now? Right? This is the old Jewish husband guilt. Like, what did I do now? Right? So she said, well, now that you're asking, Amar La, she said, Ma'olam lo tsa'artan b'derech eretz ki ha'idna. At least when we slept together, it was enjoyable. Okay. Now it was terrible last night. I'm in pain today. So what did she do? She admitted or alluded to the fact that they were together last night. So just like in the previous story, he says, honey, I went to sleep early last night. Amar la lo hada milsa ha'idna. He said, this didn't happen. She said, uh-oh, Amrale, imken hale nachrin naftuye dahave ha'idna. It must have been, right? It must have been the traveling salesman, right, who I slept with last night. I thought it was you, but, it was dark. You looked the same, and it could have been him also. So very similar to the previous story. So again, the Gemara says, if it weren't you, Dilma Chad Minhu, and it was one of the guys who came over last night. Rav Nachman reiterates the same thing, basically saying we don't buy her story. We think that she was up to no good, and she planted this whole story. She wanted to set him up just so that she has an out in the marriage. Okay, so here comes a little bit of a different story. Next case. All right, we have 2 stories left. Amar Gav, Hahu Gava, there was a person, to have a maharzik bebeta, who the inse. There was a certain person who was locked in a house with a woman who happened to be married. Okay, so far we have the setup. Al asamare de basic. So the husband comes home from work early, right? Like in the movies. Parte noaf lahutza va'arak. The husband runs through, the exact translation is, it was a wall made out of branches from a palm tree. So he runs out, okay, so that no one sees him, and he runs away. So the question is, was the deed done? Okay, that's what the Gemara wants to know. Did they in fact have bia? And is she now usher to her husband? And can she say, well, whatever, I want to get divorced? So Gemara says, Amarava, it's the Sharia. No, this woman is permitted to go back to her husband. Why would she go back to her husband? Why would she be permitted? They were together. Now, this actually brings up the whole discussion of Sota. We're going to get to Sota, well, not now. After Nazir, we're going to discuss Sota. Sota is basically a woman who was secluded and warned by her husband, hey, watch out, I got eyes on you. So she has to go to Yerushalayim and drink the water, and there's a whole procession. So this isn't exactly Sota material, but it's alluding to a potential Sota. Let's just put it that way. So the Gemara actually says, Rava says nothing happened here. So now we get a little into psychology and how people think. Because if you're going to tell me that this person actually performed the deed, this guy, this lover, Romeo, we'll call him, right, had 2 options. He could have either run away like he did, or the other option would be to hide. Now, what does he have to gain by hiding? The difference between hiding and running away is that in our case, he ran away and there was an opportunity for the husband to see his face, right? So he would never want that to happen if he really did the act. If he didn't do the act, right, the other option is he could have hid. So if he was really guilty, the Gemara says he would have hid his face, right? He would have hid in a closet, waited 15 minutes, and then he would have jumped out the window, right, like in the movies, and he would have ran away. Then the husband would never know who he is, because if he was really guilty, he'd be too embarrassed to show his face. So the Gemara uses psychology and says the fact that he showed his face, although he was really running out, right, because he showed his face, chances are he didn't do the sin yet. Now, question is, what was he doing there? Obviously, they were up to no good, but at this particular moment, the Gemara assumes that, in fact, he didn't do anything. Right? Very, it's a very, I think, novel approach to how to deal with this kind of situation. Now, the story that takes the cake is the very last one, right? We saved the best for last. So on this, the Gemara says, Hahu Gavra, Hahu Noef. So now the Gemara actually labels someone as a Noef. He's an adulterer. Okay, we're not saying Hahu Gavra, a person. We're saying the guy is a Noef. So already he's got 2 strikes. So the Noef came, the Allah Gabe Dahi Inta. Okay, he went to the house, right? Of a certain woman who was married. Asa Gavra, again, the guy comes home early from work. Salik Noef, Isav Bikilai Bavel. So when the man came home, the guy, he didn't go running outside like in the last story. He went and he sat behind the door so that he wouldn't be seen. Okay? So the guy, Romeo, right, he's sitting behind the door right? The husband has no idea there he is, where he is. And the Gemara says there happens to be some vegetables that were lying there in the house, and right, and Romeo saw, right, not the husband, but Romeo saw that the snake came and ate some of that vegetable and left half of it. Now we know from the world of Talmud that whenever there's a snake involved, we don't want to eat whatever the snake ate, because just like if like water was left out, there's something called giloi, right? Water that was left out, the snake came and left some of its venom. So the same thing is true over here. Anything a snake eats, you would never want to eat the second half of, because there's some venom left over. Okay, so Romeo's thinking, oh boy, right? Here it is. The husband is about to eat the poison pill, right? He's like all excited. So guess what happens in the story? It's the opposite. So the guy comes out. Let's get back to the case. So that without the wife knowing, the husband is about to take a bite. So Romeo springs up, right, out of nowhere and says, "No, lo techlun minhun detamin chave." Right here, he's about to do adultery, and now he saves the guy's life by warning him that a snake a minute ago just took a bite of that, and best you not eat it. So stop there for a second. So here he is. He's about to perform a horrible act, and a minute later, he's about to be nominated, right, to win a Purple Heart, right, for saving this guy's life. Very interesting. So the Gemara digs. It's a very, very thought-provoking, insightful Gemara. That's why I enjoy it so much, and I call it, like, one of the best endings to any tractate. So the question is, was something up his sleeve or not? Right? Again, we learned from last story that the guy would rather not, right? The guy over there, he ran out and he took the risk of his face being shown. So therefore we said, well, because we saw his face, chances are he didn't do anything. So what kind of logic does the Gemara use now? So Rava says, Inse Shari. Here, again, the wife is permitted, right? All four stories, all four outcomes the same. The woman is stuck with her husband. When I say stuck, because we want to think that this is her way out. But here, again, she's stuck because im esa the averi surah. Because if you really think that the evil deed was done between them two, nichale delechol v'lemes. Why is this guy all of a sudden becoming a superhero, right? What would you do, right? It's like that show, I don't know, I saw a few years ago, where they have a setup in a restaurant. I think it was on Channel 7, and they make that, and they have these actors acting out something, and someone in the restaurant is watching this, and they want to see if someone else gets involved in some other discussion. It's called, like, what would you do, right? So here's the same thing. What would the average person do if they saw this unfolding? So here the Gemara says what this person would do is that if he was really guilty, nichale delechol v'lemos. If he was really guilty, wouldn't the best ending to the story be that the husband eats it, right? He drops dead, and the lovers ride off in the sunsets, right? That's a picture perfect Hollywood ending, right? Because why? Because there's a pasuk in Yecheskel that actually links committing adultery and murder. So what's interesting is this is not the same thing as, are you allowed to kill someone? You see, there's two things that, and you shouldn't get confused, because there's a whole discussion about, is murder justifiable, right? If you walk in and you see your wife with another man and you shoot the man. So there's actually been cases in court, right, where they have compassion for you because it was a spur of the moment. And what would a normal, rational person react if he sees that? So you shoot a guy. That's kind of understandable. This is something different. It's, would a adulterer never, would that act inevitably lead to murder? Are the two somehow linked? Meaning, if you're already committing a crime, now to us it's interesting because these are two of the three averos that you have to die for, right? Avodah Zarah, Gilu Arayash, and Shfichas Damim. So here it is, this guy is performing, or the woman is performing adultery, and Rava says over here that what? That there's a link between adultery and murder, right? Adultery, right? Niyuf leads to murder. So therefore what? So therefore, if he really, so Rava's logic is that if he really did the sin, then he would want nothing more for this guy to die. So what happened in the end? He ended up saving his life. So because he saved his life, that means that he didn't really do the deed. Okay, that's the conclusion of the Gemara. So the Gemara says, Pshita. Well, this is certainly obvious. What's Rava's chiddush? Meaning, if you really think about it, it makes sense that if he really did sin, then of course you'd want him to die. But he ended up saving his life. So the guy's a tzaddik, right? He proved himself to be a tzaddik by revealing himself, which was very risky, but he did it knowing that he's about to save, right, a life. So Gemara says it's not so simple, meaning he could have had something else in mind. What would that other thing be? Gemara says, Mahu de tema, right? I could have possibly thought that this was what we call reverse psychology, meaning what? Isura of it. He really did do the act. So then if he did the act, why in the world would he want to save this guy's life? Why would he want to save the husband's life by warning him not to eat the vegetable? So the Gemara says, the reason why he said that is because because to him, he wants his cake and eat it too. He wants to have an affair with his wife, and he wants the husband to be around. Why would anybody want that? The Gemara says that they have an insa, because now he's not just committing adultery, right? He's not just getting the woman that he's always dreamed of. He's actually snatching her from under, right, her husband's nose. And there's some kind of high that you get when you perform, right? When you perform something forbidden at its highest level. It sounds absurd, but the Gemara actually has a pasuk to support it. It's what we call stolen waters, right? If you could drink water that you buy, right, in the store, or drink water that you stole, right, the stolen waters are a little bit sweeter because there was some kind of drama to getting it, right? And that's exactly what the Gemara says. Because now he could have his cake and eat it too. He has his wife, and she's still married. So there's some element of chutzpah, right? And the higher the chutzpah, the more satisfaction you get in some absurd way of enjoyment. And that's exactly what the Gemara says, because mayim genuvim mitaku, stolen waters are sweeter, v'lechem setarim yinan. And bread that's eaten privately is much better, right? What we call the forbidden fruit. So Gemara says, therefore what? I would have thought that this whole reverse psychology is going on in the guy in Romeo's head. Gemara says, Kamash Malan, it's not. So it's a very interesting ending. I mean, it's a great point. So Kamash Malan, what? So the Gemara, this is like a cliffhanger, right? That's it. That's the end of the whole Nedarim. This is the last word in the whole Masechta, Kamash Malan. So Kamash Malan, so there's a couple of interpretations on this. So the complicated or the less obvious one is what Tosfos says. If you look in Tosfos on the side says, the Gemara just asked the word pshita. The Gemara said it's obvious. What's obvious? The Gemara said, so Tosfos says it's obvious that it's not that it's obvious that if the person really sinned, then he would prefer him to die. That's not the obvious part. The obvious part is that an adulterer is actually more likely to murder also. That's what Tosfos is focused on. Tosfos is focused on the prohibited act, right? Well, of course, if you're about to commit adultery, then what will stop you from murder? It's the next logical conclusion of sinning. So therefore, the Gemara says no. So Tosfos says Mayim Genuvim Taku means that what? Means that the chiddush over here is that this Noef doesn't know this pasuk. That's what Tosfos says. This Noef doesn't understand that stolen waters are sweeter. And therefore what? He would rather to kill the husband if he in fact really did the crime. If he really had adultery, then he would really kill the husband, right? But because he didn't, that means that chances are he did not commit adultery. So that's the way Tosfos learns. And that's not Pashut Pshat, obviously. Interesting, I saw a comment by the Shita Mekubetses that says, he quotes the pasuk Na'afu v'dam biyadehem. Again, the Gemara quotes the pasuk in Yecheskel that adultery is related to the next step of murder. He says that, hold on a second, we're missing a point over here. We've been saying the whole time, murder. He's not murdering the husband. What's he doing? He is about to, if he didn't do anything, he's not taking him and strangling him like in the movies. He's just letting him eat the poison. So we should all be asking ourselves, why are you jumping from adultery to murder? He's not murdering. He's causing someone to hang themselves on the rope, right? As the saying goes. But he's not killing anyone. So that's what the point of the Shitu Mekubetze says. He says, Stam noef chasher al shfichas damim. Yeah, granted that an adulterer might be chashud on murder, the Baal shalola hatzilu mimisaso. Yeah, he may be passive and say, you know what, let the guy eat the vegetable. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to have any guilt on my head. I didn't feed him the vegetable. He found it, and I didn't say anything. I could have prevented it, but I didn't. So that's what he'll do. But the Shitu Mekubet says he proves it from the Gemara in Sanhedrin that we're not going to talk about now, but he doesn't buy this whole progression of going from adultery to murder, right? It's too much of a jump. Meaning, okay, your wife is one thing, but I'm not going to kill you, right? Which, okay, we could debate that, the merits of that argument, but it's just interesting that the Gemara has this whole discussion over here about how we think, and I always had a special place for this Gemara because it's, like I said, it goes into the mind of how people think in certain situations and what is our calculus. So I thought I just learned it. I know this happens to be today's daf, and people may have done it already, so sorry that I'm making you sit through Chazara, but in case you haven't seen this, it's just a very interesting piece on how the Talmud looks into these bang situations. So I hope you enjoyed that. And with that, we finish the Masechta of Nedarim, and I hope you all enjoyed Nedarim. And the common denominator, I think we had 6 or 7 classes, all had to do with speech, and I hope you learned some valuable lessons from various stories and other halachas that we took in this Masechta. So we're going to switch now to Nazir. I want to read the very first. Yes. Are you saying hello, or you have a question?
I do have a question. I actually have a question or comment, actually, too. Isn't it possible that the rabbis were thinking on the last scenario that a person is committing a sin under the Torah if he sees somebody under mortal danger and he can save his life? Isn't that an obligation?
Yes, it's called Lo Samar Al Dam Re'echa in Parshas Kedoshim. You can't stand by idle, Right.
So that inference you can take that from that the poor person is a Torah observer, and as a result, he wouldn't commit adultery.
Yes, but why is he? But it's interesting. Um, oh, there was actually something else I wanted to share, but it's interesting that he didn't commit adultery, but the Gemara labels him a noef. I mean, and that's how I said, sometimes the Gemara starts by saying, Ahu Gava, there was a person, there was a guy. Here, his name is Noef. His name is adulterer. So,
Right. So I had another point, if you
yeah.
just for a second.
I think the Ben Yehoyada says what I just said. I saw the Ben Yehoyada somewhere that says that. He says, it's very interesting how he's called a Noef.
So that sort of answers your question. There's a professor at Ben Gurion, I think she is, Michal Bar Siegel. I may be missing a part of her name. She teaches Talmud, and she gave a talk about things that are funny, or she talked to me in an interview about things that are funny in the Talmud, and this is definitely one of the funnier things.
It certainly is, and it's funny. I was thinking about talking about it when I gave it a few weeks ago when I was in Utah. I think we talked about the story of Baba Ben Buta on page 66b, if you remember, Daf Samech Vav, where he's having a discussion with his wife, and they speak different languages because she's from Babylonia, he's from Israel, and he asked for lentils, and he got this, and he asked for that, and then he asked for something, and she gave him candles, and she said, smash the candles on the gate.
Yeah.
And she smashed it on a guy named Bava, because Bava means gate. And so that's like the paradigm whenever it comes to humor in the Talmud, and this is like right up there also. But it's like a grotesque kind of humor, because it involves adultery, it involves murder possibly, right? So it's a little like, it's pretty heavy.
So,
it's not.
I was just going to say that my surmise, and it's probably wrong because of my lack of knowledge, is that these stories are there to reward the student for getting to the end.
That's certainly a one way to look at it. Yes, that's why you waited all this. I'm going to tell you a great.
Right.
I'm going to tell you a great capper, but yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so we could close the Nedarim for another 7.5 years. The beginning of Nazir is very similar to the beginning of Nedarim. I'll just read a few lines. The Mishnah says, "Call kino in Naziris kinaziris." This is 2a, way in the beginning. When it comes to uttering a vow of Naziros, now that we've done 90 pages of Nedarim, we've seen Nazir many, many times, because at the end of the day, becoming a Nazir is just another form of making a neder. We learn you can make a neder by saying, this piece of meat is forbidden to me, this book is forbidden to me, this hamburger is forbidden to me. So basically, wine, grapes, brandy, whatever, grape ices, anything with a grape in it is forbidden to me. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, the concept of a Nazir. So, and now any way you say it, you become a Nazir. The Mishnah says, "Ha'omer aha, harez a Nazir." There are certain type of expressions that the Mishnah, that the Chachamim said, this is going to be a way for you to become a Nazir. If you say aha, harez a Nazir. Oh, ahei, na, I'm going to be na'eh. Gemara will explain that you're a Nazir. If you say nazik, naziach, paziach, they're different code words, similar to the way Nedarim said. You said konam, konach, konaz. All these words that sound foreign to us at one point actually made a difference, and they are code words to become a Nazir. So just as an introduction, it's very important because we know whenever we have these new concepts in this class, so what I like to do is I like to go back to the source and say, let's look at it where it appears in the Chumash. So for starters, the Parsha of Nazir is found in the Parsha of Naso. Naso is known for the longest Parsha in the Chumash, with 176 psukim. And what's interesting about Nazir is that they're out of the 613 mitzvos, 10 of them, that's like 1.7%, I think. Of all the mitzvos of the Torah, 1.7% of them are related to a Nazir. 10 mitzvos are dedicated to a Nazir. We're going to see a couple hopefully soon, but it all starts with Bamidbar Perek Vav Pasuk Aleph, 6:1 in Numbers. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemar Dabral b'nei Yisrael ve'amarta alehem ish o isha. So already it's a little weird because there's a common trivia question that says, can a woman become a Nazir? So most people have to think about it, and they're thinking, well, the pasuk says Isha, so you already know that a woman could become a Nazir. Most directives aren't given to men and women. So the first question that we should be asking ourselves is, why, not would a woman want to become a Nazir, but it's just a little odd based on everything else in the Chumash about, this concept of a woman becoming a Nazir. So I saw a great commentary from the Kli Yakar, right? We use him all the time, right? He always has these awesome interpretations. So he says the following. He says, he comes from the other direction. Normally, we know that when it comes to punishments, men and women are equal, right? Women may not get the same chances a man gets when it comes to positive commandments, but we like practicing equality when it comes to punishment. Okay, that's just the way it is. So the Kli Yakar says, if they're equal, then why do I need to list a woman over here? So Kli Yakar says, right? What's interesting about Parshas Nazir, where it is in the Parsha of Naso, because just like in real estate, location is everything, right? Where is Parshas Naso? Where is Parshas Nazir? It is juxtaposed to the Parsha of Sota. So when we learn Daf Yomi, the order is Nedarim, Nazir, Sota, right? So why is Nazir right after Nedarim? Because we just said a minute ago that Nazirus is a kind of neder, right? You're prohibiting certain things from you. So why does Sota come after Nazir? Because it's interesting, in the Chumash, Sota comes before Nazir. In Daf Yomi world, Sota comes after Nazir. That's just a little bit of trivia for you out there. So the reason is, the Gemara says, well, I could tell you a very, very good answer, because after all, what is Sota all about? Sota is all about the woman that, quote unquote, strays from her husband. And what causes people to stray and to do bad things? Well, we know the answer to that: wine. So therefore, if you see a Sota, the way she's treated by the Kohen in the whole episode of Sota, the last thing you would ever want to do is drink too much wine again. So that's why Nazir and Sota are juxtaposed. And says the Kli Yakar, a beautiful line, so therefore what? So who is Nazir? He says it's ironic. He says, who would want to become a Nazir more, a man or a woman? Probably a woman. Why? Because wine is the downfall historically, right? When it comes to Yayin Nesach, we go crazy over wine today, right? When it comes to a mashgiach and how, right? They're more concerned about the wine than anything else. Why is wine? Because wine causes certain things. When it gets out of hand, all it does is cause tsaros. Same thing over here. If it causes problems and it's all related back to the Sota, then now I understand, says the Kli Yakar, why women would be more vulnerable to wine than men. That's why women are included in the parsha of Nazir, according to the Kli Yakar. Very, very interesting approach. Let's look at the psukim. Isho isha kiyafli lindor neder nazir lahazir lahashem. Right, you utter a vow to become a Nazir. Now we have all the various, right, there's 65 blots, 65 pages of Nazir. So for the next 2 months, we're going to learn every bit of information you ever wanted to know about becoming a Nazir. So you have the wine, and you have the beer, and you have anything that's intoxicating. You have vinegar, right? You can't drink it. You can't have any byproduct of grape or wine. Skins, pits, nothing to do with grapes. Okay, that's pasuk 3, and that's pasuk 4, and then he's called a kadosh. And on pasuk 5, kol yimei neder nizro ta'ar lo yaved. Then you have the whole hair situation, which we'll touch on a little bit. But I just wanted to focus on, because whenever we see a new concept, you know what I like to do? I like to look at the word. So the question is, what does the word Nazir mean? Right? We have it a lot of times in Chumash. So Rashi says, what is Nazir? I'm quoting Rashi. He says, Ein Nazira b'chol makom ela prisha. Whenever the term Nazir or Nezer comes up, it denotes prisha, which means keeping separate, to separate. Afkan shapirish min hayayin. What are you doing here? You're separating yourself from wine. Very simple. That's what the word Nazir means. Okay? Nazir lahazir, keeping yourself separate from wine. So says Rashi. Let's look at Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra says, again, same thing. The word Nazir comes from the root, it comes from the Migzeras V'yanazru. Right? The word V'yanazru, which is mentioned a few times in the Chumash, means to distance yourself. Right? Sheyarchik mitaivas, to distance yourself from your desire. Va'asezel avodas Hashem. Do it for the sake of God. Ki hayayin mashchis hadas ve'avodas Hashem. Because wine, great line, destroys all reason. Right? When you're intoxicated, right, you just can't think. Right? You're completely off kilter, right? And everything suffers. You can't serve God properly. You can't do anything, right? So that's what wine does. Very, very simple. The Rabbeinu Bechaya says something very similar. He says, "Lefi shehayayin mafsid haseichel." Okay, again, another way of explaining it, that it basically the wine, it just makes you completely not able to think clearly. So that's the same common denominator that we saw today. So it's interesting. We spoke about location. So if you know about Parshas Naso has a few different topics in it. It starts off regarding the sons of Levi and counting them, and Gershon and Kahas and Merari. Then it shifts to Sota, and then you get Nazir. And if you know Parshas Naso well, right after Nazir comes Birchas Kohanim. So I saw a very beautiful Abarbanel. The Abarbanel looks at this and says, I see a progression going on over here. He says, right? First we talk about the Levium separately. Then there's a parsha that talks about Kohanim, right? The Yisrael b'digleihem levadim. Then the Jews encamped in the desert according to their flair, right? And then in Nassau it talks about how the machne has to be, you have to get rid of those who have tzaras, and if you're tamei, right? And it goes into different categories. So tziva ata lasos bekerev amo madrega acheres ma'anashim. So now we have to do a little sub-categorization, which is what? which is another madrega. Me'anashim sheyu yoter kedosh misha'arei ha'am. Those people who are a little bit elevated from the masses. V'gam me'halaviyim v'lo yihi elavim. V'chen bidvar macherim yihiyu kedoshim min kahanei Hashem. There are those people who are holier than a Levi and holier than a Kohen. Well, how could you be holier than a Levi or a Kohen? He says, V'lo yihi kohanim v'hem hanazirim ki hinei kedushan mitzischalef mikedushas kohanim. Anyway, he goes on to say that she'en kedushan mileda. The difference is that what? Is that a Nazir isn't genetic. If you're a Kohen, your genes say you're a Kohen. If you're a Levi, then the gene says you're a Levi. But a Nazir, there's nothing genetic about it. It's your choice, right? They are born into it, right? But ki hanazirim baratzon hanazir kafi nidro. A Nazir takes it upon himself at will. Im bizman rav umuat im be'inyanim shenadar hanazir spahem, right? So therefore, they're on a higher level, right? And the proof is that when it comes to a Nazir, they're prohibited in items like a Kohen, which has to do with the hair and it has to do with Tumah, right? So the Abarbanel is saying that, yeah, Nazir is a separate category because they're different. They're different kinds of people, right? And I saw a very similar Alshich, right? The Alshich says, he says the same thing. He says, "Hinei Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu L'olam Edas Amo Yisrael Am Kedoshav V'Yomer Na Yisrael Halohu Yisbarach Hivdil Hashem Levi." Basically, don't have a complaint that God favors the Leviim and God favors on a similar note. Don't say that God just favors the Leviim and He favors the Kohanim and the Kohen Gadol gets the best treatment, because the truth is that what? That we have a Nazir who's on a higher level. He has Bechira. If you're born a Kohen, there's nothing you could do about it. Bechira, when it's your choice, that's the highest level, and that's the beauty of a Nazir, says the Alshich. I wanted to just conclude. We only have 5 minutes left, just to talk about, or we could talk about next time, the reason for this mitzvah, right? So the Sefer HaChinuch, like I said, we have 10 mitzvos altogether, 2 positive commandments and 8 negative commandments, okay? The first positive commandment is to grow the hair long, okay? I'm reading from the Sefer HaChinuch, mitzvah number 374. He says, what's the reason of this mitzvah? I'm going to read it in English just to save time. The root of the commandment, I have already written an introduction at the beginning of the book that there being something in the world of HaKadosh Baruch Hu that combines physicality and intellect, right? He goes on to say, I wish I could say it in Hebrew, I don't have time, but he has a beautiful thesis that human beings, right, are different than any other creation on earth, because we have physical being to us, but we also have intellect. Animals are just physical. All they're worried about is the next meal, right? They don't have das like man. We have intellect. And that is man. It was something fitting and necessary for Hashem to come up with properly from his creatures, that with this creature, there would be not lacking any possibilities, which we have in our minds to grasp from his world. And there is no doubt that without this reason that obligates our intellect to dwell within the physical, okay, which is involved with desire and sin, it would have been fitting for our intellect to stand and serve in front of our Creator and to recognize his honor. Meaning, if that's true, then what do we need a physical body for? Like one of the sons of God, like an angel. However, because of this obligation, it is subjugated to live in physical house. The body, the way the Chinuch draws this out, a very beautiful homily, he compares our body to a house, right? And since it is subjugated to this, it must occasionally veer from the service of its creator and tend to the needs of its home to where it lives. We have a body, which is similar to a house, but we have ruchnius, we have spirit to us. But the bottom line is, like, when you live in a house, the house always needs repairs, right? So therefore your body needs to eat, right? It needs to go to the bathroom, right? It needs to sleep for 7-8 hours. It needs to do all these things, because without it, your soul is depressed. Your soul can't live. The house needs to be fixed in order that you could live on the spiritual. You need a break. You need to exercise. You need to ski. You need to play a little sports. You need to do things to revamp, to highlight your life, to support this Holy Spirit that is imbued in us. That is what the Chinuch says. For a home structure and its lumber and its stones cannot stand without a person minding it. If so, as the intention of man's creation was according to what we have said, whenever the intellect can minimize physical work and focus on the service of its master, that's good for it, so long as it does not completely ignore the work of the house and destroy it. We don't want to destroy our body. And this would be considered a sin. Okay, and he goes on and on to say, and he says, that's what this Nazir, I'll just end off by saying this, that's what this Nazir is all about. We have this physical and we have the spiritual. And sometimes our physical gets too much, right? So it's like the Rambam, he says in Echazdeus, what do you do to something that's getting out of control? You bring it back into control. Well, how do you do that? If you're drinking too much and you go to Alcoholics Anonymous, what do? They try to figure out a way to get you off the wine completely. So then you go to the other extreme. And that's why the Rambam says, if you're getting too much pleasure, you got to stop cold turkey. And that's what a Nazir is all about. In one word, it's all about balance, right? Pendulum. Sometimes it swings this way, sometimes it swings that way. Both ways aren't good, right? It's always good in the middle. Again, we spoke about this a zillion times. Everybody has a different definition of the middle. That's why this is so hard to understand. But putting that problem aside, that's exactly what this Nazir is all about. Someone who abstains from wine says, you know what? I got to take a break. And the only way to do it is go to the other extreme. And after 30 days, because Stam Naziris is Shloshim Yom, if a person just makes a vow to be a Nazir, the default amount is 30 days. So he says, you know what? I'm going to take a break. Not that I'm going to go from 5 cups a day to 2 cups a day. I'm going to quit it completely. And after 30 days, we hope he or she is rehabilitated. And that's what this is all about. It's about having your house in order. And once your house is in order, then your spirit can serve God. But if the house is not in order, then everything is all over the place. And that is really, in a nutshell, maybe next time I'll read more of it, because he goes into the whole discussion of the Rambam and the Ramban, and is it good to be a Nazir, is it not good to be a Nazir, right? The very famous machlokes about is Nazir sinning, and this all ties into it, and maybe I will pick up from there next time. But it's 9 o'clock, and too much is no good.
Shkoch.
The answer, Hillel, is no.
I have a question.
Yes.
And it's about the hair. What is the hair? How does not cutting your hair bring you?
I will get to it next time, because there's beautiful interpretations of it.
Okay.
Hair is what stands between the physical body and God. So there's like the 50-yard line where you're half in. I
thought maybe it would you separate yourself because people don't like to see unkempt people. That's what I was thinking.
So the Chinuch does talk about that. It talks about basically from going from a lot of hair to no hair. You're doing 2 extremes, because the Nazir has to grow his hair long and long. And then one day later, when it's all over, you got to take everything off. So there's that element also. You go from extreme to extreme. So that's a point that the Chinuch also talks about. But I can't give away too much.
Okay. I actually had another question, which was when you were talking about the progression. I take, since you didn't mention Nedarim in that progression, is it not in the Sedra?
No, Nedarim is in Matos.
Okay.
At
Because
the end of, it's chapter 30 in Numbers. This is chapter 6. It's in a completely different completely different context.
very well. Thank you.
All right, guys and girls. See you next week.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.